everyone, it's Jill Foster here with Penny Black for another PB&J card class. And in today's video, I will be creating a card using one of the new stamps from Penny Black's newest release called Dream and Discover. And so here is a look at the card that we will be creating today. This is a one-layer card featuring sort of no-line watercolor. And I'll give you a look at how I like to do that with this particular stamp. So the stamp set that I am featuring today that I just love, it is so fun to paint, is 30-842 Set Sail. And I think this is such a versatile stamp set that you can use for so many occasions just by switching up your sentiment. And just as a reminder before we begin, I will have a full supply list up on screen at the very end of the video if you want to hit pause and check it out in more detail. So I'm going to be doing my watercoloring with Distress Ink re-inkers used as watercolors. So I'm just putting those onto a palette. And I went ahead and I have pre-stamped my image. The boat image is stamped in Memento Desert Sand ink. I love this ink for a no-line look. And the outer part of the bottle was stamped using archival ink in the color of Shadow Gray. I had to peek there. And I thought that just gave a nice outline to the bottle for places where I didn't want to have to paint or draw it in myself. But it's not too dark that it has the starkness of just a black stamped line. So you can mix and match with this Set Sail stamp set. You can put the boats in the bottle. I'm going to have a card and a video coming up where I've just stamped it and painted sort of an ocean or a sea around it. And you can also add other things to this bottle. You could put like a message in there, stamp a message or a sentiment in there. That might even be really fun on the inside of a card too. Now I am just starting by putting down a layer of my paint. I am using the Silver Black Velvet paintbrush, and I will have all of those supplies and the ink colors, the paint colors, everything listed again on screen up at the very end of the video. So if you want to know what colors are in my palette for this particular card, just hit pause and you can check those out in more detail. And off to the side, you can kind of see it there. I have just a napkin, and with that is my water. So if you see me reaching over there, I'm just rinsing off my brush and then patting it dry a bit onto that napkin. That way my brush isn't too wet and I have more control. Now these are actually inks. Like I said, this is Distress Ink re-inkers. So they're going to work and feel a little bit different than watercolors. And what I really love about them is a couple of things. First, the color of the ink stays very bright. So I get a pretty good sensation of what my finished colors are going to be while I'm painting. Where often with traditional watercolors, they will dry back a little bit lighter, so you have to be sort of aware of that while you're painting, where with these you get that bold rich color pretty much right from the start. Also, they move a little bit different on the paper. And speaking of paper, I am working on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. This is a cold press paper, and it's one of my favorites for watercoloring. It's just a real general, easy paper to work with. It has some texture, so when I did stamp my images, I did stamp them using a MISTI stamp positioning tool so I could do repeated stamping. Now here for the sky, I wanted to have a little bit of a looser effect, so I first just painted water onto the areas I would be painting the sky, and now I'm going in with my blue ink, and that water just gives me a little extra time, that layer of water, to move and blend that paint before it dries and I get any harsh lines. So the water can just buy you time. It also dilutes the ink a little bit, gives it a lighter look, maybe a bit more of a traditional watercolor look, which is definitely what I wanted for this sky area on this card. So I'm just going to continue working that around, sort of adding water to those edges so I don't get a harsh line, and then dropping in a little bit more so the color is just a touch bit more dynamic. I love bold colors, and so I often start light and then add in more until I'm really happy that it's nice and bold and makes a statement. On this card, I also wanted quite a bit of contrast from the sky and the sea colors. And so you can see I'm using different blues, a little bit more of a blue-green shade, grayish blue-green down at the bottom, and then more of this bright blue up in the sky. Sometimes with boats I like the sky and the sea to be nearly the same, but in this case I wanted it just a little bit different. But I am going to take a touch of that blue I was using in the sky and apply it down here into the water just so they tie together a little bit more. But I'm not putting it all over. I want to leave some sort of movement to that watery part of the sea, so it doesn't need to be a perfectly smooth layer. And then I had a bit of a hard line starting to dry there, so I'm just sort of using a damp brush and sort of scrubbing that line out. Now I went ahead and let this dry before moving on to the next step, which is the boat. And I'm starting here with just a gray, that's actually weathered wood, Distress Ink re-inker. And then coming in with more of a brown. The fun thing with these sailboats is there's like a million different combinations that you can do with them for colors, so that's really exciting to me. I feel like that gives just one stamp totally different look depending on the color combinations that a person uses. I also feel like this particular stamp set is really great for masculine cards too, if you're looking for masculine cards that are also very fun to paint. Here I'm adding a little bit of shading up to the sail. Now one thing also, when I stamped this with the Memento Desert Sand ink, when I have found when I put the Distress Ink re-inkers used as watercolors over that ink, that stamped ink, the lines that are stamped there tend to sort of just take on the color of the re-inker that I am painting with. So this is kind of my cheater way of doing no line watercolor. Personally, I really don't like working when I stamp an image in like a super light ink because I feel like I'm just straining to try and be able to see what I'm painting, or if I don't leave enough white space, then it can be easy to lose the image and just end up with like a blob of paint color. But with the Distress Ink re-inkers used as watercolors and the Memento Desert Sand ink, for some reason they just like to work together very well, and that Desert Sand ink will sort of take the color you're putting over the top of it. So you can see here, like when I'm putting these or painting this yellow over the stripes, you can still see that line down that center of that stripe, but now it looks like it's that same yellow color, that shade of that yellow gold, which I think is just so nice and easy for a no-line watercolor look. Here I'm just putting some more shading onto that. And blending it out with water, mixing a couple of colors there. And we can't forget that. Now I'm going to dry this, and you can let it air dry or use your heat gun like I have. And I'm just going to get this little bit of the sail down here at the bottom, just a touch of shading there. Also helps sort of even out those lines. And the reason you will see me drying with the heat gun in between is twofold. One, sometimes when I just don't know what to do next, I'll just dry the image so that when I think of what I want to do, I'm ready to go. Also, if I'm working on two areas that are next to each other, but they're different colors, it's very helpful to have the image dry before you go into the second area. That way they don't bleed and blend right into each other. Here I'm going to work on the top part of the bottle, sort of adding that cork in there. You can see that shadow gray that I've stamped with also does really well with actually taking the color of the Distress Ink re-inker painted on top of it, so you don't lose the detail. You don't have to go back in and draw it in, but it sort of takes on the color that goes over the top of it. I'm adding a little bit of shading here around the outside of the bottle, and I will go back and also add a little bit more to this to give it sort of the reflective look of glass, and that will be coming up here in just a minute. Just a little easy trick for that. Also an easy trick for adding some more ocean waves. And painting in here the bottom of the bottle too. I don't want to forget that. And I decided to just tie that into the color that I used on the sail. Now here I have an Arteza Twi marker. Now this is a water-based marker, so I'm using this at the very end of the process so that if I did put water near this, it would start to bleed and blend. So I wanted to use this at the very end, but it's the handiest set of markers because they have these very fine tips which you can go back in and add details. Now, this is Arteza gouache paint in titanium white, and I wanted to use it right out of the tube, so I just squeezed a little bit on my palette, and I'm just going to paint this on to a few areas down here. Now, when this goes on, especially out of the tube, it is going to be opaque. So I can cover up sort of the bottom of that boat line that was stamped, so you don't see that, you just see the water. It also adds a nice sort of reflection to this bottle. You can water gouache paint down and sort of blend it out and create a cloudy look with it as well. It's so handy. Just one tube of the white you can do so much with that. Now here is where you can re-wet it after it's hardened on your palette. So sometimes I like to use it mixed with water, and in that case I would sort of describe it as being like half acrylic, half watercolor. We use it straight out of the tube. It feels and definitely looks more like an acrylic paint. So here I'm just blending that in, kind of softening the look of that sky and the rounded edge of the bottle. And there you can see some of the paint I had painted on that sail started to bleed a little bit, so I'm going back in and adding a little bit more blue around that. If I was going to do this again, I would probably wait until the very end to do that part of the sail so that that didn't happen. But there's always a way to fix it. That's one great thing about watercolor. It is very, very forgiving. Now I'm going to dry this so that I can add more of that white gouache paint along the sides of the bottle, and I want it to be dry so that I can get that sort of dry brush look that I got on the bottom. So you can see I squeezed a little tiny bit more out of my tube, and then I am just going to sort of dry brush that along the curve of the bottle. And I love the effect that this gives. Super easy and adds even more dimension to a one-layer watercolor painting. Next, I wanted to sort of ground this image as if it wasn't just floating on the center of the card. I painted a little bit of water down, and then I am dropping in some of my Distress ink re-inker, and I'm just blending that. You can see it sort of floating and moving around on the wet surface that I added. Now if I want to pick up that paint, I just rinse off my brush, pat it on that paper towel, and I can go in with a fairly dry brush, or what often people call sort of a thirsty brush, and it will sort of soak up some of that paint. And so I go back and forth here between dark and light, trying to decide what I want. What I was going for is just a very loose there but not there kind of shadow. So often I'm sort of pouncing the paint into the wet surface on the paper and then letting that just sort of naturally blend and move. Again, starting light and then just adding a touch more to build up the color, and I can use a thirsty brush to sort of soak up some of that extra if it got in an area I don't want it any longer or if it's too dark. So the wetter it is, the more time you have to go in and move it around or soak it up. I also added just a little bit of the blue from the bottle to have that reflecting down into that surface of whatever it's sitting on. Now to finish off this card, all that was needed was a sentiment, and I got this from our new transparent set 30-845 Swimming By, and sending oceans of love as the sentiment, and I just curve that. Since it is a transparent sentiment, you can curve it on your stamp positioning tool or your acrylic block and stamped that down along the edge of the bottle. And the card is complete. This is an A2 4¼ by 5½ inch size card. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. Click the bell so that you're notified of new videos. There's lots more coming soon. And you can also follow Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, Twitter, as well as Instagram, website, and our blog. And I'll have all of those linked along with the stamps to use on this card down in the YouTube description box below. Happy stamping!